the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
Games this year with like 98 and like 99 yards rushing. So they've essentially had a 98-yard rusher 8 straight games, and that's 2 games without Jonathan Brooks. They've still had a 100-yard rusher the last 2 weeks. So I think Texas does take care of business in this one. And then we got the big game of the weekend, sir. 4:00 CBS, the final SEC championship game on CBS. The end of an era, some say. And we got the Georgia Bulldogs and the Alabama Crimson Tide, sir. We've had 32 SEC this will be the 32nd SEC championship game. The 21st of those games that has featured Georgia or Alabama. But this will be the 4th appearance of Georgia and Alabama in the SEC championship. And Alabama is 3-0 versus Georgia in the title game. And you've seen the stats. Nick Saban, 7-0 in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, 4-1 versus Kirby Smart. He's had Georgia's number. And I ask you this going into this game, who is under more pressure, Kirby Smart or Nick Saban?
I think it's Nick Saban. Kirby's won back-to-back titles. Nick's trying to prove that he's not lost his fastball, that he still hey, look, they won last year and you didn't play Bama. You didn't beat us. We were one of the 2 best teams, we think, and we lost 2 games by a combined 4 points. Like, we felt we could have hung with Georgia last year. We'll never know. It's a great what if. You can play the what if game if you're Saban last year. You can't do it now. Like, this is a huge game where you're 2-loss team and you're out again. And then it's like what we talked about on the show where you're in a bunch of these close games now. And it's great that you're unbelievable in these close games. But what if those stats of like Saban being undefeated in Atlanta, that's broken this weekend? What if those dominating sets, just like what it was just what he always has been, but against Kirby Smart, he's not that. Those are the old days. And it's like the Wire quote, like that's the thing about the old days. The old days. One of my favorite quotes in the show. And I wonder if that's just kind of where we're at with Saban and Alabama. And I think that's a possibility. Like, we'll find out on the field. And that's why I'm glad there are stakes here. I'm glad it determines whether or not who makes the playoff out of the SEC. If Bama wins, they still could get left out of the playoff, because if Texas takes care of business and Bama wins, hey, guess what? Bama, you're still not getting it. There is a mutiny if Texas gets left out and they beat Bama in a head-to-head matchup and they put the SEC team in. You want to talk about...
So many people I hear seem to think Alabama is in regardless, and that like
they should not. If Texas wins, you don't get in.
I'm with you. If there's chalk ahead of them and Texas wins, I don't know how you'd have Alabama jump Texas. But
all that being said, look, this is 2 very different teams. Look, you should not be in a dogfight against Auburn. You should not be in a dogfight with a lot of teams. You should not be down 20-7 at the half against this version of Tennessee, and have to have a 28-0 perfect second half. They're just not the same team, and we all have seen it. It's just they're winning. Like, they're closing games really well, and Saban deserves credit for second half adjustments. He's one of the best in the country at that. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. You're not going to believe this. Give Nick Saban the benefit of the doubt. But I don't know. Like, Georgia is just the rush defense is not as dominant as it's been. Like, they've allowed 100 yards from Peyton Thorne in that game, or it was right around there in the Auburn game months ago. But like, Milroe, his last 4 games, 7 rushing TDs, 297 yards, like only sacked 4 times, but like he made plays with his legs in terms of just running around the pocket, finding guys, extending plays. He's a lot more comfortable than he's been, especially early in the year. I don't know. Like, it's hard because I think he's going to have success against this Georgia team. I think in the neutral site, I think this is going to be a pretty split crowd. I think he's going to be okay. I think he's going to make some bad decisions. I think he's going to make some really good ones. He's going to make plays. I don't see how this game's a blowout. I think that's something I've looked at back and forth of like, okay, how could this game go? Is there a path to one of them blowing out the other? No, I don't think so. Georgia's never beaten Alabama, I believe, is the favorite, and they've been the favorite the last couple times against Alabama.
No, Georgia was the favorite in the national championship.
Were they? I thought Bama was the favorite in that one.
After they lost the SEC championship, they were still favored in the national championship.
So, But I think maybe are they 3-1 or something, or have they been favored in the SEC championship?
I mean,
every
that's
time
the only time they've beaten them since Matthew Stafford was there. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, either
one
way,
and whatever.
and I don't think they've ever beaten Alabama in the SEC championship game, obviously in Atlanta. So you have that record here, and I just
0-3.
I mean, it's hard. The Bulldogs. I've gone back and forth on this, Matt Green, because I could see a path to just. It's so dumb to keep picking against Nick Saban, but it doesn't feel the same week over week. I can't shake the feeling that it does not feel the same, and I don't think they win here. So I think this game's close. I could see a great second half Carson Beck coming out party and dicing up, and they win the second half. Maybe Alabama is the team that gets out to a good start against Georgia, because we've seen that teams have scored early. Tennessee, obviously, the first play against Georgia. Georgia started slow. I think this might be a game where Bama's up at the half, and Georgia comes out with some big-time second-half adjustments, and they kind of break the game open a little bit. So I think Georgia wins and covers. Give me...
Oh, after all that.
I think Georgia's I think Georgia right now is the best team in college football, and I think Alabama's like the 7th or 8th team. I still don't think they're there.
This spread has moved a little bit. So what's your score? And I'll tell you if it's...
Give me 31 Georgia, 20 Alabama.
31-20. Okay. Yeah, so the spread right now, I think it started at 3.5. I think it got up to 6. Now it looks like 5.5. So I'm not exactly sure what Vegas thinks about this game. But I look at this this matchup, and so these two teams, there was 4 common opponents, and they're pretty solid common opponents too, because obviously at Auburn, they're rivalry games with both of those. They both played Tennessee, they both played Ole Miss at home, and they both played Kentucky. And in those games, Alabama won by an average score of 33.5 to 18.8. Plus 15 points essentially on average versus those 4 teams. Georgia against those same teams won by an average of 42 to 15, plus 27. So like that's a huge difference. You look at, and obviously that doesn't tell us everything. I think we saw the same thing in 2021, and Alabama was able to beat that Georgia team in the SEC championship. But you look at Alabama's had 8 games this season that were a 1-score game going into the fourth quarter. That's happened to Georgia twice. So you've seen week after week, like there were a couple games like Missouri and Georgia Tech were 1-score games at some point in the fourth quarter, but they weren't entering the fourth quarter. But you look at just week after week, this Alabama team is just having to grind it out with everybody. And that's what I think is so interesting. Like what is Alabama's like identity this year? Like what are their strengths, would you say? I'm sure, or just go ahead.
I mean, definitely pass rush. I think their pass rush is a strength still with Dallas Turner and company.
Let me simplify. I left it too open ended. I think Alabama would say their identity is defense and running the football, and both of those things, that's not really Georgia's identity. Georgia does both of those things better than Alabama does.
I was gonna say I don't even think it's running the football. It's a lot of it's a lot of, hey, Milroe, go make a play. Like McClellan has not been great this year. I mean,
Milroe is part of the rushing attack, but yeah,
they're 45th
you're
in rushing this year.
Exactly, and so that's what I'm saying. Like they don't necessarily have like an identity to lean on. Like their defense is, the whole what joyless murder ball thing. Yeah. It's like they're fine. They're a good defense. Like they're a really good defense, but they're not like the best defense in the country. Like they're as good as Georgia, maybe better. Like they're not like I would say these defenses are indistinguishable from each other. They're both really good defenses, right? You can split hairs and say one is better than the other, but you look at these offenses and it's not even close. Like Georgia's just better at everything offensively, and they're so much more efficient. I saw that stat from Graham Coffey, like in their like in these 4 games that I mentioned. Like Alabama's net yards per play was like 0.82 and Georgia was like plus 0.25 or something, just like a massive difference. And I just, you look at who Alabama's played down the stretch. Cause I really do think like you can just say like I'm hedging my bet or whatever, or like kind of cover my own ass. But I feel like we were right about Alabama, like coming into this season, but we were wrong about the rest of the SEC West. Like Texas A&M fired their coach. They were terrible. Like LSU had like the worst defense, maybe in school history this year. Like this was a flawed Alabama team, but it was also a flawed SEC West. And they were able to get by a lot of these teams. Ole Miss, one of their closer games. Like Ole Miss is fine. Like they lost to Georgia and Alabama. So obviously you would say those are two good losses, but there's just not a lot of great teams that they faced. So I don't think they've, other than and we saw LSU put up 28 points in 3 quarters with Jaden Daniels, and they basically didn't have him for the whole 4th quarter. And that's obviously the best offense they've played this season. And I think you're going to see Georgia have the same type of success that LSU did. And they don't have the defense that Georgia has, like this isn't going to be some just shootout, like 40 something to 40 something. Like I just don't see that. I see with what Jalen Milroe is. And I think with what Georgia's defense, like you saw how Georgia attacked Joe Milton. And obviously Joe Milton is nowhere close to the athlete that Jalen Milroe is. But they basically just dared him to beat them from the pocket. And you saw Georgia's got maybe the best secondary in college football. They were able to win that way. And Joe Milton was not able to hit enough throws. And I just don't trust Jalen Milroe's accuracy to beat Georgia with his arm. If he's able to get loose and just be running around making plays, like that's how Alabama can win this game. But I think you're going to see Georgia be more disciplined than Auburn was a week ago. I don't think you're going to see Jalen Milroe constantly running for first downs. I think Georgia just has a different level of athlete at that linebacker position and the secondary than anyone that Alabama's seen all season, in my opinion. So I think this, honestly, I'm not going to say it's Jalen Hurts level, like national championship type stuff, like getting shut out at halftime, but I think this game has a lot of blowout potential. I think there's a chance if Jalen Milroe like isn't able to get, because I mean, you look at these Alabama receivers too, like who's the one that really scares you? Like Jermaine Burton's a good player. He's not Marvin Harrison Jr. He's not Jamar Chase. Like he's not some superstar that can just Luther Burden that can just open up the secondary. He's a good player. And you look at what Georgia's got in the secondary, I think they have the advantage everywhere. So I think you could see Milroe make some plays with his legs, but I think for the most part, Georgia's going to keep him under wraps and make him win with his arm. And I think Georgia wins this thing big. I think it's like, I'm going to say 38-17. I think Georgia wins this. And I think the dynasty is officially over once Nick Saban has never gone 3 years without a national title since he's been at Alabama. And I think going a 3rd year without a national title, I think it would really signify the passing of the torch that Georgia is the top dog in the SEC. No pun intended.
Go. Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.